Yael, tell me, what are three things we should know about Yael?
Cool. Okay, so the first thing is that I was born and raised in the north of Israel, and both of my parents were social workers. So not coming from and has nothing to do, literally nothing to do with technology or business. And I also had no exposure to these worlds growing up. So there were years that I thought this is actually a disadvantage, but over time I realized that I think actually the challenge and kind of figuring things for myself is what pushes me forward, and I learned to really appreciate it. The second thing is that my friends laugh at me that I often set myself random goals just for the fun. Right now it's being able to do a handstand, but sometimes it's bigger. Sometimes it's like getting to a good business school or things like that. And I'm kind of not letting go until I get there. And the last piece is that I'm a huge fan of Tel Aviv and urban life in general. I lived in several different cities over the years, and I think that Tel Aviv is just literally the greatest city in the world. And you can often see me using my bicycles to get to work or go to a yoga class or drop off my girls in school. And I think it's also not surprising that some of the best founders are here, and it helps as well.
Can you do a handstand yet?
Right now I'm still leaning on the wall, and I can like only get away for like a couple of seconds, but I'll get there.
Amazing. How did you get into venture capital?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I didn't know that I wanted to get into venture when I started my career, and my path there was probably longer compared to other people. So I knew I wanted to do things that mattered and that I enjoyed. And when I started my career, I served in Unit 8200 and then worked as a consultant at McKinsey, moved to Boston, got an MBA, worked at a startup for a few years at VIA. And then only when we decided to move back to Israel and I kind of started thinking, okay, what's next? I started learning more about venture. And I spent a lot of time essentially talking to anyone I knew and anyone I could get a conversation with in this ecosystem. And I realized that venture just sounded exactly like a great combination of everything I've done before. And I decided that this is what I wanted to do. And one of the people I talked to in my search was Naama Shlam. She was a past colleague of mine from my days at McKinsey, and she worked at Bessemer at the time, and she made the intro. And as soon as I met the team, I felt like this was the right fit for me, the right team, and this is where I wanted to join. And luckily things worked, and the rest is history.
Amazing. What was the biggest mistake you've made and the lesson you learned from it in venture?
Yeah. So probably if you ask any investor, they have this like one deal that they missed or something that they wish they would do. And for me, there was definitely one that was more memorable than others in my first year as an investor, so on my earlier days. But there was a team that I met, and they weren't even raising at the time, and I just came out from the meeting and I had this like wow effect. I was like, okay, I love the team, I love the vision, I love just the energy and how quickly they move. And I remember walking back to the office and trying to kind of now rationalize to myself, okay, why do we need to invest? And it was very hard to find like a scientific explanation or find the data to support this decision. There was a lot of competition. They were first timers, and there was literally just no data yet. And ultimately we decided to pass. And obviously after a while, I saw that they continued and they did amazingly and they grew exponentially, and they kind of beat the competition, but also grew to adjacent categories that didn't even exist before. And for me, the lesson or the kind of when I'm thinking what I learned from it is that I definitely have to trust my instinct way more. Specifically as an early stage investor, I really like data. I'm a very analytical person. But as an early stage investor, I think there are many signs that are kind of between the lines that you have to read into, and they help you build your conviction. And I learned to just get much, much more comfortable with kind of trusting these signs and also being able to kind of explain them over time. And I think that it's pretty rare that I get out of a meeting so energized, but that's a sign that probably other employees or other investors or customers will get this energy as well. And it's often kind of a sign for me that I have to dive deeper quickly and kind of often it also making a bet at the end of it, but definitely exploring it much further.
Yeah, it's all about the data that you cannot connect, the uncorrelated data, they're able to see.
Yeah, yeah. There are things that are, just hard to point, but like if you think about it, okay, there were small signs and kind of the dots are connected.
What do you wish you knew before you got into venture capital?
I think that if any earlier investors that are earlier in their career or first time like investors that are in their first year, I think it's really important to just being able to find your own voice and your own uniqueness and kind of speak up. I think it's sometimes scary when you're in your if you're the youngest in the room or if you're different or coming from a different background. But I wish I kind of known before that there's this uniqueness. It actually has a lot of like that's what brings value. This is where you can bring value to the table, and it can actually be often like more refreshing or bringing the diversity or the different background. I learned that there's certain things or nuances that I was able to read, and others maybe not. And eventually, I think that uniqueness is kind of what makes you a good investor or a unique investor. So kind of leaning into those differences.
Right. What advice would you have for anyone thinking about entering this as a career?
Yeah. So often people ask me how to get into venture, and I typically like first push back and I'm kind of like, why do you want to get into venture? Ask yourself, like, what is it about it that you're attracted to? Like, what do you think you'll do? And make sure that you understand what the day-to-day looks like, talk to other investors and learn more. But for the ones that want to get into venture, I think that identifying what type of investor you want to be, like what are the categories you're excited about? Is it consumer or cyber? You'll be a very different type of investor, and the fund you need to join to is also very different. Also, early stage versus late stage or growth, these are also different. But ultimately, probably the most important thing is that if you decided to go for it, you have to be very proactive and kind of paving your own path and being very proactive, just getting there.
What question would you like to leave for our next guest?
I think that now, when the world is changing and technology and AI are kind of everywhere, and everyone are thinking how this will impact their day-to-day life and I think the question for me or the question for the next guest that I'm curious about is how they think that VC will look like in 10 years from now, in 5 years from now, even if in 3 years from now. My guess is that it will be very different. There are many tasks that might be automated, but I also think that there's something core in the decision making and just building trust. At the end, it's kind of a business of human interactions that I think is irreplaceable, but I'm curious to learn how other things think about it as well.
Amazing. I love it. Yael, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.